On Christmas Eve, my husband screamed that I was a useless obstacle to his glory. He and his mistress laughed as they exiled me from the plaza into a blizzard, convinced they finally controlled the real estate empire. Little did they know, the land under their billion-dollar tower belonged to a blind trust, and the sole owner on the deed was the wife they had just thrown away. My name is Valerie, and standing in the shadow of a 20-foot Christmas tree inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. At 34 years old, I had mastered the art of being invisible. The air smelled of expensive pine, roasted duck, and the distinct, metallic scent of old money. It was Christmas Eve, the night the real estate elite of New York gathered to measure their net worth against one another. My husband, Julian, stood in the center of the room, bathed in the golden glow of the chandeliers. He was holding a crystal tumbler of scotch, laughing at a joke made by a hedge fund manager. He looked radiant, the very picture of the real estate king, a title the industry magazines had bestowed upon him just this week. I took a step forward, intending to fix his crooked tie, but I stopped. Monica was already there. She was 24, sleek, and dressed in a gown that cost more than my first car. She was Julian's executive assistant, or so the payroll said, tonight. However, she was something else entirely. Julian raised his glass, commanding the attention of the 200 guests. "I have to thank the people who make the impossible possible," Julian announced, his voice booming with charisma. He wrapped an arm around Monica's waist, pulling her flush against him. "Monica here. She is my right hand. The Aurora Tower project would be nothing without her vision. She is the future of this company." The applause was polite but confused. Eyes darted toward me. I stood frozen near the buffet table, clutching a glass of red wine so hard I thought the stem might snap. He had not even looked at me. Not once. I felt a sudden, desperate need to be acknowledged, to remind him that I existed. I moved toward them, my legs feeling heavy. "Julian," I said softly. He turned, his smile vanishing the instant he saw me. The disdain in his eyes was a physical blow. I flinched, and in that split second of clumsiness, my heel caught on the thick carpet. I stumbled. The red wine launched from my glass, creating a perfect crimson arc before splashing across the front of Monica's pearl-white dress. The ballroom went silent. The music seemed to stop. Monica gasped, looking down at the stain spreading across her chest like a gunshot wound. "You!" Julian's face turned a violent shade of red. He grabbed my wrist, his grip bruising. "You clumsy, useless woman. Look what you did. I didn't mean to," I stammered, my voice trembling. "You never mean to," Julian roared, and his voice echoed off the high ceilings. He didn't care who was watching anymore. "That is your problem, Valerie. You are a leech. You stumble through life, dragging me down while I try to build an empire. You have no class, no business sense, just a dead weight around my neck." The guests whispered behind their hands. I saw pity in some eyes, but mostly I saw amusement. To them, this was just entertainment. Julian released my wrist with a shove. He turned to the crowd, then back to me, his eyes cold and hard. "I am done," he spat. "I am done carrying you. I want a divorce." The air left my lungs. "Julian, please, not here." "Yes, here. Right now," he yelled, pointing toward the heavy brass doors. "Get out. Go back to that miserable apartment. I will have the papers sent over at 8 in the morning. Sign them. Do not make this difficult. Valerie. I need to focus on the Aurora Tower, and I cannot do that with you hovering over me like a bad omen." He turned his back on me to comfort Monica, who was dabbing at her dress with a napkin, a smirk playing on her lips that only I could see. The crowd parted for me. a sea of black tuxedos and diamond chokers creating a path of shame toward the exit. No one said a word. Their silence was worse than Julian's shouting. It was a silence that said, I did not matter. I walked through the revolving doors and out into the biting cold of Fifth Avenue. A blizzard had settled over the city. The wind howled, cutting through my thin coat, but I did not hail a taxi immediately. I stood on the sidewalk, snow melting against my burning cheeks. I did not cry. Tears were for people who had lost something valuable. As the cold seeped into my bones, replacing the heat of my humiliation, I realized something terrifying and liberating. Julian thought he had discarded a piece of trash. He had no idea he had just lit the fuse on a bomb that was sitting directly beneath his feet. My hands were steady as I steered my sedan through the slush of the FDR drive. The heater rattled, blowing lukewarm air against my frozen fingers, but the cold inside the car was nothing compared to the icy clarity settling in my chest. I was heading to my old apartment in Brooklyn, a small brownstone I had kept since before I became Mrs. Julian Vance. It was the only place left in the world that was truly mine. As the windshield wipers slapped away the snow, my mind drifted back 10 years. I remembered the first time I saw Julian. He was sitting in a cramped coffee shop in the village, sketching furiously on a napkin. He wore a fraying wool coat and looked like he hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. I fell in love with his hunger before I ever fell in love with the man. He had told me he wanted to reshape the skyline, and I had believed him. I wanted to be the foundation beneath his feet. He thought I was just Valerie, the quiet girl who organized his schedule and cooked his meals. He never asked about my life before New York. If he had, he might have learned about my grandfather, a man who had terrified half of Chicago. My grandfather was a land speculator who taught me that real estate was not about bricks and mortar. It was about zoning laws, air rights, and leverage. He taught me that the person who owns the dirt controls the sky. Julian believed his rise to power was a result of his own genius. He truly believed that he had an uncanny knack for finding prime real estate just as the market was turning. He was a fool. I was the one who found the toxic waste dumps and the abandoned warehouses. I used 5 different shell companies and 3 different aliases to buy those dead parcels of land. I scrubbed the titles clean. Then, through a complex web of intermediaries, I sold them to Julian's company for pennies on the dollar. I was his angel investor, his lucky star, and his silent partner. Every success he toasted to tonight was paid for with my inheritance and my strategy. I parked the car and climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. The air inside was stale. I walked straight to the bedroom and pushed aside the heavy oak dresser. Behind it was a wall safe. I spun the dial, the combination ingrained in my muscle memory. Inside lay the true history of Julian's empire. I pulled out a thick stack of documents. On top was the deed to the property known as Port Number 4. It was a massive stretch of waterfront land in Queens, the exact location where Julian had just broken ground on the Aurora Tower. He thought he owned the land. In reality, he only held a lease. I flipped through the other papers in the safe, and my blood ran cold. I found copies of bank transfers I had intercepted last month but had been too afraid to confront him about. There, in black and white, was the proof of his ultimate disrespect. Julian had transferred ownership of our vacation home in the Hamptons to a trust controlled by Monica. I looked closer at the signature line. It was my name, written in a looping script that looked almost perfect. Almost. You idiot. I whispered to the empty room, my finger tracing the ink. You actually forged my signature. You committed a felony for her. The vibration of my phone startled me. It was a text message from Arthur, my personal attorney and the only person in New York who knew my real last name. The 99-year lease for Port Number 4 has a termination clause. Section 8, Paragraph C. Read it. I opened the leather-bound lease agreement for Port Number 4. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon until I found the paragraph Arthur had referenced. If the lessee engages in conduct that damages the moral reputation of the project, or if there is an unauthorized change in the executive leadership structure without prior written consent from the lessor reserves the right to revoke the land use rights immediately and unconditionally. I sat back on the dusty floorboards. Julian had just publicly humiliated me and announced his intention to divorce me, effectively changing his leadership structure. He had also admitted to an affair, damaging the reputation of the project before the first beam was even raised. I looked at the divorce papers he had surely sent to my email by now. He wanted me to sign them quickly. He wanted me to disappear so he could claim his victory. I closed the folder. The hurt was still there, throbbing like a fresh bruise, but something stronger was rising to meet it. "No," I said aloud, my voice echoing in the small room. "I am not signing anything tomorrow." I was not going to give him a quick divorce. I was going to give him an eviction notice. The following days were a blur of calculated silence. While Julian and Monica paraded through the office like conquering monarchs, I went underground. They were too busy celebrating their coup to notice the foundation crumbling beneath them. They started a purge, firing anyone who had ever shown loyalty to me. I sat in a dimly lit booth at a diner in Queens, nursing a black coffee. Across from me sat Robert, the company's CFO. He looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him. His hands shook as he slid a USB drive across the table. "They fired me this morning," Robert said, his voice low and raspy. Monica walked into my office with security. She said I was redundant. "I'm sorry, Robert," I said, taking the drive. "But this will help us make things right. It's all there." "Valerie," he whispered, leaning in. The numbers didn't add up for months. I traced the discrepancies. Julian isn't just overspending. He's gutting the Aurora Tower project. He swapped the structural steel for a cheaper grade imported from a supplier that doesn't even have a safety certification. He saved nearly $4 million on that alone. And the money I asked? "Diverted," Robert said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "to a private account in the Caymans, then transferred to a real estate holding company that just purchased a villa in Tuscany. Guess whose name is on the deed, Monica?" I said, my grip tightening on the drive. "He is risking everything," Robert choked out. "If the inspectors find out about the steel, people could die. The building could collapse." I nodded grimly. "It won't get that far." Back at my apartment, I booted up my laptop. Years ago, when Julian was just starting out, I had set up the company's internal network. I kept a backdoor administrative access key that no one, not even the current IT director, knew about. I typed in the command lines, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "Access granted." I bypassed the firewalls and went straight into Monica's corporate email. It was a treasure trove of incompetence and betrayal. I scrolled through hundreds of emails about party planning and designer clothes until I found a thread titled Project Blue. It was a correspondence with the CEO of Redstone Group, Julian's biggest competitor. I opened the latest attachment. It was the confidential bid for the city's new subway expansion project, a contract Julian was desperate to win. Monica wasn't just sleeping with the boss, she was selling him out for a finder's fee. "You greedy little," I muttered, saving the files to an external drive. I turned on the television. The news was broadcasting a live press conference from the construction site of the Aurora Tower. Julian stood at a podium, looking every bit the visionary leader. The wind whipped his hair, but he looked invincible. Monica stood behind him, smiling that predatory smile. "This tower represents the future," Julian shouted into the microphone, his voice booming over the applause. "We have secured the land, we have the funding, and nothing will stop us from touching the sky. Aurora Tower is fully owned and operated by Vance Enterprises." I looked down at the document resting on my lap. It was the original land use rights agreement for the property he was standing on. My finger traced the clause at the bottom of page 12. Clause 9, breach of ethical conduct. If the lessee engages in any activity deemed unethical, fraudulent, or criminally negligent, or if there is a fundamental change in the executive leadership structure without prior written notification to the lessor reserves the right to terminate this lease immediately and unconditionally. Julian thought he owned the land. He didn't know he was just a tenant, and his landlord was about to evict him. I opened a new document on my laptop. At the top of the page, I typed the header Notice of Lease Termination. I signed it not as Valerie Vance, but as the director of Nemesis Holdings. Enjoy your press conference. Julian, I said to the screen, watching him bask in the applause. Because tomorrow, you're going to be homeless. 2 days later, I was summoned to Julian's penthouse office like a naughty schoolgirl being called to the principal's office. The room was a shrine to his ego, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he thought he owned. Julian sat behind his massive mahogany desk, tapping a gold pen against a thick stack of papers. Monica was perched on the edge of the desk, crossing her legs to show off her stockings. "You are late," Julian said, not looking up. "Sit down. Let's get this over with." He slid the divorce settlement across the desk. I picked it up. It was brutal. He was offering me absolutely nothing except my personal belongings and the old sedan I drove. No alimony, no shares in the company, and no claim on the marital assets. It was an insult printed on legal bond paper. "It is a fair offer," Monica chimed in, smiling sweetly. As she raised her hand to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the light caught a massive diamond on her finger. It was a canary yellow diamond, at least 5 carats. My stomach churned. I recognized that stone. I had seen the invoice for it in the stolen files Robert gave me. That ring cost $300,000, and it was paid for directly from the employee pension fund account. She was wearing the retirement savings of our janitors and secretaries on her ring finger. I don't know about this." "Julian," I said, forcing my voice to tremble. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller. "It seems very sudden. Do not play the victim. Valerie." Julian snapped. "You bring nothing to the table. You have no job, no connections, and no skills. I am being generous by not suing you for obstruction of my career. You have been a dead weight for 10 years. I know I'm not smart like you," I stammered, picking up the pen. I want to make sure I am not responsible for your business debts. You know, in case the tower has problems." Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He looked at Monica, and they shared a look of pure amusement. "She thinks the Aurora Tower will have problems." Julian scoffed. "Valerie, that building is going to make me a billionaire. But fine, if it makes you feel better, sign the addendum. We included a clause separating our liabilities. I do not want your bad credit score affecting me anyway." He didn't even read the paragraph I had subtly altered in the preliminary draft I sent over an hour ago. I had inserted a specific line about total exemption from all future corporate litigation involving Vance Enterprises. By signing this, he was legally shielding me from the criminal charges that were about to rain down on him. I signed the papers with a shaky hand. "There, it's done." "Good." Julian snatched the papers away. "Now get out. Monica and I have a celebration lunch." I walked to the elevator, keeping my head down until the doors closed. As soon as the metal doors shut, my posture straightened. I checked my watch. It was 12 o'clock exactly. As I walked out of the building lobby, a man in a cheap suit walked in. He was holding a large manila envelope. I knew him. He was a process server. I paused by the revolving doors, watching through the glass. The man went up to the security desk, flashed a badge, and headed for the elevators. 10 minutes later, chaos erupted on the top floor. According to the panicked voicemails I intercepted later, the server walked right into Julian's office just as he was popping a bottle of champagne. He handed Julian a cease and desist order from a company called Nemesis Holdings. It was a lawsuit for breach of contract on the Port No. 4 land lease. "Who the hell is Nemesis Holdings?" Julian screamed, his voice cracking on the recording. Get them on the phone. Offer them money. Offer them double the rent. Just make them go away. They tried. Oh, how they tried. Julian and Monica spent the next 4 hours frantically calling the number listed on the lawsuit, but they never got through to the owner. They only reached a stony-faced lawyer who informed them that his client was not interested in a settlement. The lease is terminated effective immediately due to moral turpitude and unauthorized leadership changes, the lawyer told them. Vacate the premises. By 3 in the afternoon, the court order had reached the construction site. I drove past the site on my way home. The massive cranes, which cost $50,000 a day to operate, were stationary. The gates were locked. Hundreds of workers stood around, confused and angry. The Aurora Tower was dead in the water. Every single day that the construction halted, Julian lost nearly $2 million in interest payments and penalties. He thought he had cut me loose to fly higher, but he had just realized his parachute was rigged. The collapse did not happen all at once, but when it started, it was deafening. The injunction on the Aurora Tower was the first domino, and it knocked down everything standing in its path. Within 48 hours of the construction site going silent, the institutional investors began to panic. These were men who smelled fear like sharks smell blood. They started pulling their capital commitments, citing the indefinite legal delay. I watched the chaos unfold from the safety of my living room, monitoring the internal company channels I still had access to. Julian was bleeding money. He was burning through cash reserves at a rate of $300,000 a day just to keep the lights on and the lawyers paid. Desperate. Julian began to eat his own tail. I saw the transfer requests come through. He was forcing Monica to sign over the deeds to the Hamptons house and the Tuscany villa he had hidden in her name. He needed to mortgage them to secure emergency bridge loans. You want me to sign what I heard Monica's voice on the covert recording from Julian's office. Just sign the damn papers. Monica Julian screamed. I could hear the slam of his hand against the desk. I need liquidity. The banks are freezing the credit lines because of that lawsuit from Nemesis. I need cash to bribe the zoning board. To pay the legal fees. But this is my house, Monica whimpered, her voice trembling. You said it was my security. I am your security. Julian roared. Sign it, Monica signed. But the seed of betrayal had bloomed. Later that afternoon, while Julian was screaming at his legal team, I tracked a call from Monica's private cell phone. She dialed the direct line of the acquisitions VP at Redstone Group. I have shares, she whispered hurriedly into the phone, locked in the office bathroom. I have 5% of Vance Enterprises. I want to sell today. Cash. No, don't tell him. Just get me out. She was rats fleeing a sinking ship. But I was not done flooding the deck. I picked up a burner phone and sent a package I had prepared weeks ago to the investigative desk of the New York Times. It contained the invoices Robert had given me, proving that Julian had purchased non-certified structural steel that was prone to fracturing under stress. The story broke the next morning at 6 o'clock. The headline was Devastating Death Trap in the Sky Vance Enterprises Used Banned Materials in Luxury Tower. By the time the stock market opened at 9:30, the damage was catastrophic. I watched the ticker symbol for Julian's company turn red and plummet. 10% down, 20% down. Trading was halted twice due to volatility, but the freefall continued. My phone rang. It was Julian. I let it ring 3 times before answering. What I said calmly, You? Julian sounded breathless, like he had been running. You are a witch. You are a curse. Valerie, everything was fine until you left. You walked out that door and you took my luck with you. I didn't take your luck. Julian, I said, sipping my tea, I took my brains. You are just realizing you never had any of your own. Shut up, he shrieked, his voice cracking. This is your bad energy. You put a hex on me. I am going to fix this. I am Julian Vance. I am a king. You are just nothing. You really don't get it. Do you? I asked softly. You think this is bad luck, Julian? You haven't seen hell yet. I hung up. An hour later, the final blow landed. Because the stock price had dropped below a certain threshold. It triggered a covenant in his loan agreements with the major lenders. His debt-to-equity ratio had violated the bank's safety limits. The email notification popped up on my screen. A carbon copy of what was currently hitting Julian's inbox. It was a notice of immediate foreclosure. The bank was calling in all its loans. They were seizing every piece of real estate collateralized against the company's debt. This included the office building, the warehouses, and the penthouse he was currently standing in. He was not just broke. He was underwater by about $80 million. The empire was not just crumbling. It was being repossessed. The silence in the penthouse had been replaced by the sound of shattering glass. Through the audio surveillance I still had active in the apartment, I listened to the romance of the century disintegrate under the weight of bankruptcy. You were trying to wire money to a Swiss account, Julian screamed. The distortion on the microphone could not hide the hysteria in his voice. I saw the laptop. Monica, you are stealing from me while I am trying to save us. There is no us anymore. Julian, Monica shrieked back. Look at this place. The marshals are coming on Monday to tag the furniture. I am not going to wait around to be homeless just because you failed? I failed. I failed because I gave you everything. You gave me things because you wanted a trophy. Monica laughed, and it was a cruel, hollow sound. Do you think I stayed with you for your personality? I stayed because of the credit card limit. Julian. And now that the cards are declined, you are just a pathetic old man yelling at a wall. There was a moment of silence, heavy and suffocating. Then I heard the sound of a suitcase zipper being yanked shut. I never loved you, Monica said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. I tolerated you. And honestly, it was barely worth the effort even when you were rich. I took off my headphones. The satisfaction was bitter, like dark chocolate, while they were tearing each other apart in a penthouse they no longer owned. I was sitting in a mahogany-paneled conference room at the First National Bank of New York. Across from me sat the vice president of commercial lending. He looked exhausted. Julian's toxic debt was an anchor dragging his portfolio down, and he was desperate to cut it loose. We are prepared to offload the entire Vance Enterprises debt package, the banker said, sliding a thick contract toward me. This includes the construction loans, the personal guarantees, and the mortgages. But I must warn you, Ms. Nemesis. The recovery rate is projected to be near zero. I am aware of the risks, I said, signing the document Nemesis Holdings used for acquisitions. I will take the debt for 10 cents on the dollar. The banker looked like he wanted to hug me. He had no idea he was handing me the whip to tame the lion. With a single signature, I became the primary creditor of Vance Enterprises. Julian Vance now owed every single cent of his existence to his estranged wife. 2 hours later, I sent a text message to Monica. I know about Redstone. Meet me at the Starbucks on 57th Street in 20 minutes. Or I send the FBI to the airport. She arrived in 15 minutes. She was wearing sunglasses and a scarf, trying to look incognito, but her hands were shaking so bad she nearly dropped her latte. I didn't waste time. I placed a folder on the table. Inside were the chat logs proving she had sold the subway bid secrets to Julian's rival. This is corporate espionage and grand larceny, I said calmly. That is 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Monica, you won't look very pretty in an orange jumpsuit. What? What do you want? Monica stammered, looking around the coffee shop with wild eyes. I have no money. Julian spent it all. I don't want your money. I said, I want him. I leaned forward. Julian is going down for embezzlement. He used company funds for personal expenses. I need a witness who can testify to his direct instructions. I need someone who knows where the bodies are buried. Monica swallowed hard. If you testify that Julian coerced you, that he was the mastermind and you were just following orders, I will make sure the evidence about Redstone disappears." I said, "You walk away. You leave New York with whatever dignity you have left. But Julian takes the fall for everything." It took her less than 5 seconds to decide. The love of Julian's life, his muse, his right hand, looked at me with eyes devoid of loyalty. He made me sign those transfers," Monica said, her voice gaining strength. "He forced me. I can tell the prosecutor that. I can give them the dates and the account numbers." "Good girl," I said, standing up. "Keep your phone on. The district attorney will be calling you shortly." I walked out into the cold afternoon air. Julian was alone now. He just didn't know it yet. The walls were finally closing in, and the silence in Julian's world was deafening. By Friday afternoon, he was a king presiding over a graveyard. The office floor was deserted. Most employees had simply stopped showing up after the payroll checks bounced on Tuesday. Monica was gone, having cleared out her desk and vanished into witness protection preparation. The only thing left on Julian's desk was a heavy envelope delivered by courier that morning. It was a formal notice for an extraordinary general meeting of shareholders, scheduled for 9 o'clock the next morning. The agenda had only one item: a vote of no confidence to remove Julian Vance as CEO and chairman of the board. I sat in my apartment, watching the hidden camera feed on my tablet. Julian was pacing his office, reading the notice over and over again. He laughed, a dry, jagged sound. He was not packing his bags. He was not calling lawyers. He was calm because he was bad at math. Julian still believed he was untouchable. He owned 40% of the company's stock. In his arrogant mind, that was a controlling interest. He believed the other shareholders were too fragmented to unite against him. He had no idea that for the past 6 months, I had been quietly buying up every loose share on the secondary market through 3 different brokerages. I did not have 10%. I did not have 20%. I had accumulated exactly 51% of the voting rights. I stood up and walked to my closet. I pushed aside the soft cardigans and floral dresses that Julian had always preferred I wear because they made me look submissive. From the back, I pulled out a garment bag I had bought weeks ago. I unzipped it to reveal a white suit. It was sharp, tailored to perfection, and aggressive. It was the kind of suit a woman wears when she is done apologizing. This is who I am now, I whispered to my reflection. Earlier that day, I had met with the 3 largest minority shareholders at a private club in Midtown. They were old men, tired of Julian's volatility and terrified of losing their investment. When I walked in, they looked confused. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Henderson, the pension fund manager, asked, I don't understand why you called us here. Please, sit down, I said, placing a thick binder on the table. Julian is toxic. The company is drowning in debt, and the Aurora Tower is legally dead. But I have a life raft. You, Henderson scoffed. With all due respect. You are a housewife. I am Nemesis Holdings, I said, sliding the proof of ownership across the mahogany table. The silence in the room lasted for a full minute. They looked from the documents to me, their eyes widening. You, Henderson stammered, his hand shaking as he reached for his water glass. You are the one suing the company. You own the land. I own the land. I own the debt. And as of this morning, I own the majority of the stock. I said coldly, if you vote with me tomorrow to oust Julian, I will lift the legal injunctions. I will restructure the debt. The stock price will recover. If you stick with Julian, I will foreclose on Monday, and you will lose every single penny. We are with you, Henderson said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. Back in the present, on the screen. Julian was making a phone call. I turned up the volume. He was desperate. He was digging through his old contacts, trying to find a lifeline. He dialed a number I recognized immediately. It was my father's old private line in Chicago, which was now routed directly to the family trust attorney. Julian had never cared about my family. He thought my father was a retired clerk. He was calling to beg for a loan from a man he hadn't spoken to in 10 years. "Hello," Julian barked into the phone. Is this Frank?" "It's Julian. Look, I need a favor. I have a liquidity issue." I listened as my attorney on the other end delivered the news. "What do you mean he's dead?" Julian shouted, his face draining of color. 5 years ago, why didn't anyone tell me he listened for another moment? And then he slumped into his chair, the phone slipping from his hand. She inherited everything he whispered to the empty room. Valerie owns the trust he had finally realized that he had been sleeping next to a fortune while scrambling for pennies. Night fell over the city. The office lights were off, save for the glow of the city outside. Julian sat alone at the head of the long conference table, a bottle of expensive whiskey in front of him. He was drunk. They can't touch me," he mumbled, pouring another glass with a trembling hand. "I am the king. I built this. She is just a ghost. Tomorrow I will show them." He raised his glass to the empty chairs. "To me." He slurred. "To the winner." He had no idea that he was already a corpse. He just hadn't been buried yet. The boardroom on the 45th floor smelled of stale coffee and fear. It was 9 in the morning on Saturday, a time usually reserved for golf, but today the 12 members of the board sat in stiff silence. Julian stood at the head of the table, looking like a man who had been fighting ghosts for 3 days straight. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he reeked of mints, likely an attempt to mask the whiskey on his breath. Despite looking like a wreck, his arrogance was intact. He paced back and forth, gesturing wildly at the projection screen that showed a plummeting stock graph. "This is a temporary correction," Julian shouted, his voice hoarse. "The market is reacting to fake news. This Nemesis Holdings, they are corporate terrorists. They are trying to bleed us dry with frivolous lawsuits. But I have a plan. I am going to countersue. I am going to crush them." Mr. Henderson, the oldest board member, cleared his throat. "Julian, the construction is halted. The bank has called the loans. We are insolvent. I am the majority shareholder." Julian slammed his fist on the table. "I decide when we are insolvent I own 40% of this company. And I say we fight." At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open. I walked in. The sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor was the only sound in the room. I was wearing the white suit, tailored sharp enough to cut glass. My hair was pulled back, my makeup was flawless, and I held my head high. Behind me walked Arthur, my attorney, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Julian froze mid-gesture. He squinted at me, confusion warring with annoyance on his face. Then, a smirk twisted his lips. "Valerie," he let out an incredulous laugh. "What are you doing here? Did you get lost? This is a board meeting, not a support group for discarded wives. Security." He reached for the intercom button on the table. "Get security up here. My wife is having a breakdown." "I wouldn't do that, Julian," I said, my voice calm and projecting clearly across the room. I didn't stop walking until I reached the opposite end of the table, facing him directly. "You have no right to be here," Julian sneered. "Get out. You are embarrassing yourself." Arthur stepped forward and placed a document on the table. "Mr. Vance, my client is not here in the capacity of your spouse. She is here as the legal representative of Nemesis Holdings, and, more importantly, she is here as the majority shareholder of Vance Enterprises." Julian blinked, his mouth hanging open. That is impossible. I have 40%. No one has more than me. You have 40%. Arthur corrected, adjusting his glasses. The other shareholders combined held 60% over the last 6 months through various entities. My client has acquired all outstanding floating shares and purchased the blocks from the 3 minor partners. Ms. Vance currently controls 51% of the voting stock. She is the new chairwoman of the board. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian looked around the room, waiting for someone to laugh, to tell him it was a joke. Instead, Mr. Henderson stood up. He buttoned his jacket and turned to me. "Welcome, Madam Chairwoman," Henderson said respectfully. One by one, the other board members stood up, turning their backs on Julian to face me. It was a wave of gray suits shifting allegiance in real time. "Sit down," Julian screamed, his face turning purple. "I am the CEO. I built this. She is a nobody. She knows nothing about business. Actually, Julian," I said, plugging a USB drive into the console. "I know everything. Sit down." I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The command was absolute. Julian collapsed into his chair, looking small and defeated. The screen behind him flickered and changed. Instead of his stock graph, it now displayed a spreadsheet titled Unauthorized Fund Diversion, 2023-2025. "Let us look at the numbers," I said, clicking a remote. "Here we see a transfer of $2 million to a shell company in the Caymans." Julian marked this as consulting fees. However, if you track the IP address of the recipient, it resolves to a jewelry store in Milan. I clicked again. "Here is the invoice for the structural steel used in the Aurora Tower. The budget was $12 million. The actual cost was $4 million. The remaining $8 million. It went into a private hedge fund under your name." "Lies?" Julian gasped, gripping the armrests of his chair. "These are all lies. You forged this. You have no proof that I authorized any of this." "I thought you might say that," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "So, I brought a witness." I pressed a button on the console. A video call window popped up on the massive screen. The connection established, and a face filled the room. It was Monica. She was sitting in a sterile room, looking pale and stripped of all her glamour. She wore no makeup, and her eyes were red. "Monica," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "Monica, tell them she is lying." Monica didn't look at the camera. She looked down at her hands. "He made me do it," Monica said, her voice shaking but audible. "Julian gave me the account numbers. He told me that if I didn't sign the transfers, he would fire me. He said everyone does it. He said the steel didn't matter because he would sell the building before the inspections happened." "You traitor," Julian screamed, lunging toward the screen before realizing he couldn't touch her. "I gave you everything you—" "You snake. Thank you, Monica," I said, cutting the feed. The screen went black. I looked at Julian. He was panting, sweat dripping down his forehead. The board members looked at him with pure disgust. "The motion on the floor," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade, "is the immediate removal of Julian Vance from all executive positions, effective this second." "Seconded," Henderson said immediately. "All in favor," I asked. Every single hand in the room went up, including mine. The vote was unanimous. The sight of those 12 raised hands signaled the end of an era. Julian looked at the sea of raised hands, and the reality of his situation finally pierced through his delusion. The veneer of the sophisticated CEO cracked and fell away, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. He let out a guttural roar, grabbing a heavy crystal water pitcher from the center of the table and hurling it at the screen where Monica's face had been moments ago. Glass shattered everywhere, raining down on the expensive carpet. Then, he turned his wild eyes on me. You did this," he screamed, foam actually gathering at the corners of his mouth. "You poisoned them against me. I am the genius here. I am the..." I am the victim. He lunged across the conference table, scrambling over the documents and leather binders, clawing his way toward me with his fingers curled into talons. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to physically erase the mistake he had made in underestimating me, but he never reached me. Before he could get within 5 feet, 2 massive pairs of hands grabbed him by the shoulders and slammed him back down onto the hard wood. It was Miller and Johnson, the 2 head security guards Julian had tried to fire last week to save budget. I had rehired them yesterday with a 20% raise. They pinned him down with grim satisfaction, twisting his arms behind his back. I didn't flinch. I walked around to the table until I was standing right in front of his face. He was panting, his cheek pressed against the cold wood, looking up at me with a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated hatred. "Do you remember what you told me at the plaza?" "Julian," I asked softly. "You said I was a useless obstacle. You said you needed to cut the dead weight to reach the top." I leaned in closer so only he could hear the steel in my voice. "You were right. This company does not need useless people. And the only useless person in this room is you." The double doors burst open again. This time, it wasn't a shareholder. It was a squad of 6 officers wearing FBI windbreakers, followed by the district attorney himself. Julian Vance, the lead agent, shouted, his voice booming off the walls. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. Hands behind your back." Now Miller and Johnson yanked Julian upright and spun him around to face the officers. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Julian struggled, but he was weak. He looked over his shoulder at me. For the first time in 10 years, he wasn't looking at me like I was furniture or a trophy. He was looking at me with absolute terror, finally realizing that the woman he had discarded was a monster he had accidentally created. "Valerie, wait. Please," he stammered, his bravado dissolving into tears. I can fix this. We can talk. Don't let them take me. I am your husband." I picked up the termination notice Arthur had prepared. I uncapped my pen. "You are not my husband," I said, signing my name with a flourish. "You are a liability. I am seizing your remaining shares to cover the debt you owe Nemesis Holdings. You leave this building with exactly what I left the plaza with. Nothing." The agents hauled him out. I followed them to the elevator. We rode down in silence, broken only by Julian's pathetic whimpering. When the doors opened to the lobby, the entire staff was waiting. I had sent a company-wide memo telling everyone to gather in the atrium. Hundreds of employees watched as their arrogant boss was dragged out in cuffs. There was no applause, just a heavy, judgmental silence. Julian tried to hide his face, but the news cameras were already flashing outside the glass doors. He was shoved into the back of a squad car, and just like that, the reign of the real estate king was over. I turned back to the crowd of anxious employees. They looked terrified, wondering if they were next. I walked to the center of the lobby, standing next to the architectural model of the tower. "Julian Vance is gone," I announced, my voice steady and echoing through the hall. "But this company remains. We are going to rebuild. We are going to fix the mistakes. And we are going to start by renaming the project that nearly destroyed us." I reached out and ripped the Golden Aurora nameplate off the model base. "It is no longer the Aurora Tower," I said. "From today on, it is Phoenix Heights, because we are going to rise from the ashes stronger than before." The fallout was swift, but for Monica, it was a slow burn. She avoided a prison sentence thanks to her immunity deal, but she quickly learned that freedom without reputation is its own kind of jail. The real estate world in New York is a small village, and news of her betrayal traveled faster than a subway train. No reputable firm would touch the woman who sold corporate secrets and testified against her own lover. The last I heard, she had been forced to leave the city entirely and was working double shifts at a diner in New Jersey, struggling to pay the rent on a studio apartment that was smaller than her old shoe closet. She had wanted a life of luxury, but she ended up with a life of obscurity. My first act as the undisputed chairwoman was to heal the wounds Julian had inflicted on the company culture. I did not buy a new yacht or a summer home. Instead, I sat down with Robert and went through the list of every single employee Julian had fired during his manic purge. I contacted them all, from the junior architects to the maintenance staff, and offered them their jobs back with a 20% raise and full back pay for the time they were unemployed. "Welcome home," I told Robert when he walked back into his office. He looked at me, his eyes misty behind his glasses. "Thank you, Valerie. We didn't think anyone cared. We are not just building a tower." "Robert," I said firmly, "we are building a legacy. It took exactly 12 months of grueling work to correct the structural issues and finish the construction. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, 1 year after my humiliation, the Phoenix Heights Tower finally pierced the Manhattan skyline. It was a marvel of engineering, a sleek spire of glass and steel that shimmered like a diamond. It was no longer a symbol of Julian's greed. It was a testament to resilience. I stood on the observation deck of the 95th floor. The gala was in full swing behind me, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and jazz music. But I stepped away from the crowd, walking to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall. Below me, New York City was spread out like a carpet of jewels. The streets were gridlocked with red taillights and gold headlights. It was snowing, big fat flakes that swirled in the wind. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I remembered standing on the sidewalk outside the plaza exactly 365 days ago. I remembered the biting cold, the shame burning my cheeks, and the feeling that I was entirely alone in the world. That pain was gone now. It had been replaced by a profound sense of relief. I had cut out the malignant tumor that was ruining my life, and the wound had healed into a scar that made me stronger. My phone buzzed in my evening bag. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. The caller ID read, "Inmate call, Rikers Island Correctional Facility." It was Julian. He had been sentenced to 12 years for fraud and embezzlement. He called occasionally, usually to blame me for his misery or to beg for money for the commissary. I answered the phone but didn't say a word. "Valerie." His voice was tinny and desperate, echoing against concrete walls. "Valerie, are you there? Please, I know it is Christmas. I am all alone in here. I need a little money for the phone card. Just a few $100s. I am sorry." "Okay, I am really sorry." I listened to him beg. The man who had once screamed that I was useless was now reduced to pleading for pocket change. "Valerie," he cracked, "say something." I didn't say anything. I simply pressed the red button to end the call. Then, I went into my settings and blocked the number permanently. "Miss Vance." I turned around. Arthur was standing there, holding 2 crystal flutes of vintage champagne. Behind him were Robert, Miller, and Johnson, my team, my friends, my family. "They are waiting for your toast, Madame Chairwoman," Arthur said with a warm smile. I took the glass and looked back one last time at the city lights below. I smiled, feeling lighter than air. I realized then that the sweetest revenge was not seeing Julian suffer in a cell. The true revenge was living a life so magnificent, so full of success and loyalty, that he could never touch it again. "To the future," I said, raising my glass. To the future, they cheered. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Julian's fate. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.